This Mafia king destroyed his whole life with one selfie. Damian Vale was the kind of man the whole city feared. Untouchable, unstoppable, built like a king on money and violence. But the craziest part? Nobody took him down. No rival, no bullet, no betrayal. He ruined everything himself by sending one photo of him and his mistress to his pregnant wife. And Clara? She didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't chase him. She just left the ring, took the baby, and vanished from his empire like he never mattered. That's the moment the king lost everything.
The city's most formidable man made a singular, catastrophic error that cost him his entire enterprise. Damian Vale presided over a domain built on intimidation and wealth, seemingly inviolable, entirely dominant, until an act of supreme hubris led him to transmit a photograph to his pregnant wife. No weapon could breach his defenses, no adversary could shatter his control. Yet that single image, a portrait of infidelity, destroyed the one asset his power could not secure, the woman who loved him. This is an analysis of a narcissist who lost his empire via a digital confession. From his penthouse on the 47th floor, he did not merely see the city, he commanded it. The windows displayed a sprawling grid of lights that functioned as a single subservient organism. Each point of light signified an individual who either submitted to Damian Vale's influence or contributed to it. The residence was a testament to calculated extravagance. Italian marble flooring amplified the scarce light. Furnishings were valued higher than the average citizen's vehicle. The art had been procured through methods that defied ethical scrutiny. And at the epicenter of this curated splendor was Clara Vale, 7 months into her pregnancy. Methodically folding impossibly small articles of clothing, a precision born from a lack of any other purpose, her motions were automatic. Smooth the garment, align its seams, fold 1, 2, 3 times. Each item, smaller than her hand, was a promise she feared would go unfulfilled. The nursery located down the hall was finished but sterile. Its walls were a soft gray the decorator termed morning mist, and billed accordingly. The crib stood ready, a mobile hung in perfect stillness. The entire room waited for a life that would be born into a marital structure Clara doubted still functioned. Her gaze fell upon the dining table, 2 place settings, 2 glasses for wine, one of which would hold only water, 2 napkins creased into the triangles Damian insisted upon. It was a nightly ritual of hope, arranging a table for a spouse who seldom returned to occupy his seat. 7:43 p.m. He had promised 7 o'clock. Clara rationalized that traffic was the cause. She constructed a narrative of a prolonged meeting. She repeated the familiar, comforting falsehoods that had become a secondary dialect over the last 8 months. Each lie was simpler to articulate, yet more difficult to accept. The fetus kicked. A distinct, rolling sensation across her abdomen provoked a simultaneous gasp and smile. She placed a hand on the area, feeling the small form adjust its position within her. "I am aware," she whispered. "I feel his absence, too." This was the most painful aspect of her condition. She genuinely missed him, not the man who had systematically converted their home into a lodging he frequented, but the man he was before the empire's expansion, before dominance became more alluring than partnership. She missed Daniel. This was her name for him in the relationship's initial phase, before he demanded the more severe, detached Damian. She recalled how he prepared breakfast on Sundays, poorly made scrambled eggs, served with such conviction that she consumed every bite. She longed for the nights they slept intertwined, his hand resting protectively on her hip, his respiration a steady rhythm against her neck. She missed being his primary focus. Now she was an asset to be managed, provided for, and kept in extreme comfort inside a magnificent enclosure while her husband erected testaments to his own invincibility. Clara placed the onesie, pale yellow with a pattern of tiny elephants, down and pushed herself off the sofa. Her equilibrium had altered in ways that continued to disconcert her. Her own body had become a vessel both wondrous and alien. She approached the window, her form a translucent outline against the glass, observing the city Damien purported to possess. Amidst those lights, he was executing strategies, negotiating contracts, securing his authority, becoming more of the figure he needed to be and less of the partner she required. The fetus kicked again, with greater force. "Hush," Clara whispered, making slow circles on her stomach. "He will return home. He invariably does." Yet as she voiced the words, she questioned what home signified to a man who had transformed himself into a myth. Elsewhere in the city, at an establishment with a 6-month waiting list and a clientele of consequence, Damien Vale was demonstrating his own importance. He occupied a private chamber where the lighting was engineered for flattery, where a single bottle of wine exceeded a weekly salary, and where his companion was conspicuously not his expectant wife. Sienna Crow possessed a beauty that was self-aware and weaponized. High cheekbones, dark eyes that held a look of perpetual mockery, and lips colored like fresh blood. She carried an aura of danger, cultivating a persona of reckless poise that rendered intelligent men foolish and powerful men incautious. At that moment, she was making Damien into both. "Inform me of something," she began, agitating the wine in her glass. "Do you ever return to that monument you constructed? Or is it merely evidence that you can afford a spouse?" Damien produced a laugh. It was a vocalization that lacked any genuine mirth, one he employed when a statement struck too near the truth. "I return home." "At what times?" "Between corporate takeovers and territorial acquisitions." Sienna leaned in, her smile predatory. "I have known you for 4 months, Damien. You have mentioned your wife on 2 occasions. Your penthouse 5 times. Your empire without pause. What is your own analysis of this data?" "It indicates that I am focused." "It indicates you are experiencing profound ennui." The word impacted the room like a projectile, disturbing Damien's meticulously maintained self-assurance. He reached for his Bordeaux, which the sommelier had handled like a holy relic, and drank more deeply than its quality merited. "Clara is pregnant," he offered, as if this were a complete explanation. 7 months. The situation is complex. All situations become complex when one is attempting to rationalize being in a place one wishes to avoid. Sienna's gaze was sharp. "Describe her, this wife of whom you never speak." Damien adjusted his position. The query felt like an entrapment, though he could not determine which response would trigger it. "She is a good person, kind. She will be an excellent mother." "How sentimental." Sienna's tone was saturated with ridicule. "Good and kind. The same descriptors one would apply to a well-behaved canine." "That is not—" Damien curtailed his own sentence, his jaw muscles tensing. "You have no knowledge of her." "I do not require it. I have knowledge of you." Sienna set her glass down and observed him with the intensity of a hunter evaluating its target. "You engineered yourself into something exceptional, Damien. You wield authority, you own fear. Men twice your age defer to you, and you return home to someone who what? Folds clothing, waits in quiet compliance, asks about the mundane details of your day." Each phrase was a precise incision, aimed at a truth Damien had actively avoided. The reality was he was ignorant of Clara's daily life. He did not know if she experienced happiness or despair. or if she was merely marking time until the infant's arrival gave her a purpose beyond his own absence. She consented to this life, he stated, recognizing the defensive tone in his voice. Did she? Sienna inclined her head. Or did she consent to a man who later became someone else? The private room began to feel claustrophobic, its temperature rising. Damien loosened his collar, a Tom Ford garment tailored to flawlessness, and motioned for more wine he did not require. What is the purpose of this line of questioning? He demanded. My motive is curiosity. Sienna's smile was predatory. I wish to ascertain if the great Damien Vale is truly untouchable, or if some vestige of guilt remains for abandoning a pregnant woman in a tower. I have not abandoned her. She possesses everything she requires, except for you. The server's arrival with a new bottle interrupted the escalating tension. Damien observed the wine pouring into his glass, wondering at what point luxury had shifted from a sign of success to a form of anesthetic. I am her provider, he said after the server departed. The residence, the security, the finest physicians available. She will never experience want. How very magnanimous. Sienna took a small sip of wine. You have purchased for her an exceedingly comfortable prison. It is not a prison. She has the freedom to... He paused, confronting the realization that he was unaware of the freedoms Clara actually possessed. To leave? The threat had never been made. To object? Her complaints were rare. To demand his time? She had ceased making such requests months ago. The subsequent silence served as a condemnation. Do you know my assessment? Sienna asked, her voice becoming soft, almost menacing. I believe you are terrified. Of what? Of being unremarkable? Of being a mere husband and father rather than a monarch. Consequently, you have convinced yourself that monetary provision is equivalent to emotional presence, that being feared by the populace is superior to being loved by your wife. She paused, allowing the assessment to resonate. Tell me that I am incorrect. Damien wished to offer a rebuttal. He wanted to defend his position with the incisive logic he used in his professional dealings, but the words failed him. Instead, he felt a sensation akin to shame, and he resented Sienna for instilling it. This conversation is honest, Sienna concluded. I am aware. Which is why you appear to want to flee, but you will not. Because fleeing would necessitate a return home, a destination you actively wish to avoid. Is that not correct? She was right. He did not. The penthouse registered as a museum of his own pathology, aesthetically pleasing but emotionally sterile. In this construct, Clara had been relegated to the status of an exhibit, the dutiful spouse, a flawless component of his curated life. To engage with her was to confront the chasm between his professed identity and his functional behavior. It would precipitate inquiries for which he had no adequate response. The preferable alternative was to remain here, consuming intoxicants with a woman who demanded only superficial engagement. Another bottle? Sienna inquired, her expression indicating a successful manipulation. Damien consented. At 8:30, Clara's device registered an incoming text. Meeting running late, don't wait up. 6 words, absent of apology or acknowledgement of the cooling dinner, a dismissal delivered with the emotional resonance of a meteorological update. Clara fixated on the message for a sustained period before placing the phone screen down. A normative response would involve anger or a demand for accountability. Instead, she experienced the familiar somatic sensation of disappointment. She reverted to a repetitive, mechanical task: folding infant clothing. A fetal movement occurred, a phenomenon that still prompted a sense of wonder despite its regularity. She was gestating a new human organism, an act of creation in profound isolation from her marital partner, with whom she shared a surname but little else. "It will be different when you are here," she vocalized to her abdomen. "He will remember what is important. He will return." The statements functioned as a form of magical thinking, an attempt to negotiate with a non-responsive universe. She considered contacting her brother Evan, who had maintained suspicion of Damien from the outset, positing that men who project power are often compensating for profound insecurity. To concede Evan's accuracy would require admitting a significant error in her own judgment, a psychological task for which Clara was not prepared. Instead, she remained in the gilded penthouse, surrounded by material wealth, folding clothing for an infant whose father was, elsewhere in the city, becoming increasingly alien. By 10 o'clock, Damien was clinically intoxicated. Not to the point of motor impairment, but to a level of disinhibition where consequences became abstract and behavioral controls dissolved. In this state, Sienna's vocalizations were perceived as melodic and her provocations as courtship rituals. They had vacated the restaurant an hour prior, disregarding the bill with the assurance of individuals for whom financial limits are non-existent. They were now at Sienna's residence, a loft whose calculated state of incompletion signified immense wealth, where the city lights distorted into abstract patterns. "Your presentation is different tonight," Sienna observed. She was arranged on a leather sofa, her wineglass held loosely. "Less controlled. I find it appealing." "I am relaxed," Damien stated, though the term was inaccurate. Relaxation implies ease. His state was more akin to free fall, a sensation of gravitational release. "You are in flight," Sienna corrected, "from the monument, the wife, the life you have so meticulously constructed." She set down her glass and approached him with a predatory economy of motion. "The question is, toward what are you running?" She was now in his immediate proximity, her perfume a dark, spiced olfactory stimulus that triggered associations with prescribed behaviors, proximity sufficient to constitute a choice. "This is an adverse course of action," Damien verbalized, yet he made no move to increase the distance. "The most rewarding ones often are." Sienna's hand made contact with his chest, positioned over his heart. "You have spent months feigning satisfaction that your perfect penthouse and pregnant wife are sufficient, but they are not, are they? If they were, your presence here would be inexplicable." Her logic was a toxic admixture of truth and manipulation. Damien recognized the dynamic, understood the game being played, yet did not withdraw or terminate the interaction, failing to perform any of the actions consistent with the role of a faithful spouse. Instead, he permitted himself to fantasize about ceasing the performance, of abandoning the persona of the untouchable king and devoted husband to be simply reckless, authentic, and wrong. "Damien," Sienna murmured, her lips near his. "When did you last engage in an activity solely for the purpose of personal desire, not because it was strategic or intelligent or part of a plan, simply because you wanted it?" He could not recall. Every decision for the past 3 years had been a calculated variable. Even his marriage to Clara was partially strategic. Her lineage conferred legitimacy upon his enterprise. When had he ceased choosing based on personal fulfillment? "Prove it," Sienna whispered into his ear. "Prove you are not just a man performing power. Prove you can still be dangerous." "How?" The word emerged with an unintended roughness. Sienna created a small space between them to meet his gaze, her eyes showing a clear challenge. Create a photographic record with me, right now, something authentic, something that demonstrates you are here by choice, not by obligation. Damien's heart rate accelerated. That is dangerous. I am aware. That is the objective. She smiled, a sharp, knowing expression. Unless you are too afraid. There it was, the provocation, baited with the one challenge Damien's narcissistic framework could not permit him to refuse. His entire empire was founded on a cultivated image of fearlessness. How could he retreat from a simple photograph? I am not afraid, he said. Then demonstrate it. Sienna produced her phone, positioning her body close against his. Smile as if you feel it. She raised the camera. Damien observed their reflection on the screen. Sienna's sharp, unapologetic beauty and his own face, flushed from alcohol and recklessness. They appeared as a bonded pair celebrating a shared victory. The flash activated. Perfect, Sienna commented, reviewing the image. We appear good together, dangerous together. Damien viewed the photograph over her shoulder. Her assessment was correct. They looked like individuals engaged in living rather than performing. Now transmit it to her, Sienna stated conversationally. The words detonated in the quiet moment. What? Your wife. Sienna faced him directly, her expression a blend of amusement and cruelty. Send her this photograph. Prove you are not governed by fear or guilt, or the psychic mechanisms that keep you performing the role of devoted husband. That is irrational. That is honest. Sienna's gaze held his. Currently, you are attempting to maintain two conflicting realities. You desire danger, then be dangerous. Cease the performance and make a definitive choice. Damien's heart beat heavily. Every rational cognitive process indicated this was a catastrophic error, an act that would shatter his marriage and inflict irreversible harm upon Clara. But the alcohol was a potent disinhibitor, and Sienna's challenge resonated with a dark, pathological element within him. The months of feigned contentment, the performative intimacy with Clara. Perhaps honesty was a form of cruelty, perhaps cruelty was a form of freedom. His thumb hovered over Clara's contact information, the image poised for transmission. Unless you're afraid, Sienna whispered once more. Damien Vale had built a legacy on being unafraid, on never retreating. He depressed the send icon. The message departed with a soft sound like a final closing door. For a single lucid second, Damien felt omnipotent, reckless, and liberated. Then the subject's reality testing returned. What did I just... he began, but Sienna was laughing. You actually executed it, she said, her eyes bright with triumph and a darker sentiment. The great Damien Vale, choosing chaos over control. I did not believe you were capable. Damien stared at his device, at the delivery confirmation beneath the photograph. Across the city, in a residence he owned, his pregnant wife was about to receive data that would destroy their shared reality. The feeling of power he had experienced moments before transmuted into a visceral sickness. I need to... He could not complete the sentence. Explain it? The words did not exist. Fix it? The action was irreversible. Sienna was still smiling, but her expression had modulated to one of clinical pity. Welcome to the consequences, Damien. It appears being untouchable does not grant immunity from self-destruction. He looked at her then with clarity and perceived her for the first time not as a partner but as a mirror, reflecting his own worst pathologies, a reality he was too arrogant to see until the damage was complete. I have to leave, he said, already moving. To do what? Explain? Apologize? Sienna's voice pursued him. You sent that photograph intentionally, Damien. You cannot unsend it. You cannot unbreak what you have just broken. The subject exhibited nonverbal avoidance, securing his coat before moving to the elevator, his body entering a state of acute panic entirely foreign to his controlled personality. The subject, Damien Vale, operates on a platform of control, emotional regulation, and infallibility. This event constitutes a critical error with potentially catastrophic consequences. The elevator's transit induced a state of temporal distortion. He fixated on his spouse's contact information, attempting to formulate a mitigation strategy for the photographic evidence he had transmitted. The potential explanations, accident or meaninglessness, were both falsehoods transparent to the recipient. The underlying pathology was a compulsion to test boundaries, to shatter his own meticulously constructed facade. Having cultivated an identity of invulnerability, he failed to account for his own capacity for self-destruction. The elevator opened to the street, where the subject's driver was stationed with the impassivity of a professional auxiliary. Upon entering the Mercedes, the olfactory comfort typically associated with the leather interior was replaced by a morbid sensory perception, akin to a tomb. Home was his sole directive, a term that prompted immediate cognitive dissonance. The concept of home implies belonging and acceptance, conditions he now assessed as void in his penthouse on the 47th floor. A dissociative state was indicated by the blurring of the city's lights through the window. He observed the cityscape, contemplating the normative lives of others. Familial dinners, paternal routines, emotional presence, lifestyles he had pathologically scorned. His self-concept was built on a grandiose belief in his own superiority. This psychological framework, however, is precisely what predisposed him to an act of marital sabotage via a digital image, simply to affirm his own power. The 20-minute journey was subjectively experienced as being much longer. The subject's device remained inert, the silence from his wife proving more destabilizing than overt hostility would have been. His building's night doorman, an anonymous figure, facilitated his entry with standard deference. "Evening, Mr. Vale," the subject responded with a nod, experiencing stress-induced aphonia, and proceeded to the private elevator leading to his penthouse. This space functions as his monument to achievement, yet also his self-imposed cage. The ascent over 47 floors was rapid. The doors revealed a foyer of Italian marble and modern art, designed to his exact specifications 3 years prior. The active lighting indicated a presence. He vocalized his wife's name. "Clara." The sound reverberated in the stillness. A dining table set for two with cold food was a clear artifact of abandonment. He perceived a profound environmental wrongness and unnatural quietude. The stillness was not one of tranquility, but of absence. He called her name again with increased volume, receiving no response. The subject then conducted a systematic search of the penthouse, his panic escalating with each unoccupied room. The living room contained a small, ordered pile of infant apparel. The kitchen was sterile. The nursery remained a perfect, empty diorama. He paused at their bedroom doorway. The bed was meticulously made. His wife's nightstand was cleared of all personal effects. Her closet was ajar, revealing significant voids. Placed on his pillow were a small velvet box and a single folded note. The subject's hands displayed a pronounced tremor as he retrieved the items. Inside the box was Clara's wedding band, a platinum and diamond ring he acquired when a month's salary was a meaningful metric. The note was on her customary cream stationery. Her penmanship was remarkably stable and controlled. Damien, thank you for the honesty. The image conveyed what words could not, your true priorities and affiliations. I have spent 7 months awaiting your return, but I now see you are already home, just not with me. I will not engage in conflict. I am choosing peace for myself and for our child. You have built a remarkable empire. I trust it will provide you warmth. My legal counsel will be in touch regarding custody. You may be a father to this child, but my role as wife to a ghost is concluded. Clara. The subject reread the document multiple times, a form of cognitive denial. The words remained unchanged. Her calm, clinical tone offered no emotional vulnerability for him to exploit. She had simply excised herself. He collapsed onto the bed, surrounded by the expensive trappings of his success. For the first time, Damien Vale, a personality defined by his perceived invulnerability, experienced a total loss of power. His device vibrated with a text from the other woman, Sienna. So, how'd she take it? The message's casual cruelty triggered a sudden, jarring moment of empathy, allowing him to approximate the humiliation and betrayal Clara must have experienced. It was a sharp realization of his own insignificance to a person he had claimed to love. He did not reply. He sat in the vast, empty chamber, holding the symbolic ring, and analyzed how he had redefined self-destruction as a form of personal freedom. Beyond the glass, the city was a constellation of a million lights. Each point of light represented a life, a choice, a consequence. In his silent monument, Damien Vale confronted the cost of being untouchable, a terminal state of isolation. The subject did not sleep. He remained in the living area until dawn, clutching the letter, observing the sky's transition. The beauty of the morning presented a galling irony. By 7 a.m., his device logged 23 messages from business associates and his second-in-command, Marcus Chen, who noted Damien had missed their 6 a.m. strategy call for the first time in 2 years. A final message was from Sienna. "You're not answering. Did I break you?" The subject deleted it without engaging. His attempts to contact Clara were met with her voicemail, a recording from a time when she presumed his interest. "Hi, you've reached Clara. Leave a message." His own attempt to leave a message faltered. "Clara, it's me. Please, I need to talk to you. I need to explain." He terminated the effort, recognizing he had no valid explanation. "Just call me back, please." An hour later, the calls went directly to voicemail. By noon, he was pacing the penthouse with the agitation of a caged animal. The subject's meticulously structured routine had collapsed. A critical meeting with the Castellano family, the culmination of months of negotiation, was abandoned. Instead, he fixated on the folded infant clothes, unable to recall the last instance he had inquired about his wife's well-being. His phone rang. A brief, irrational hope it was Clara was dispelled. It was Marcus. "Where the hell are you?" The subordinate was direct. "The Castellanos are threatening to walk. They view your absence as a sign of disrespect." "Handle it," Damien ordered, his voice hoarse. A notable silence followed. In 5 years of service, Marcus had never received such a directive. "Handle it how?" he asked with caution. "I don't care. Offer them the e-stocks, give them whatever they want, make it go away." "Damien, what is going on? Are you sick?" "My wife left me," he stated with flat affect. "Last night, she's gone." After another pause, Marcus, who understood Clara only as a peripheral fact in Damien's life, offered assistance. "I'm sorry, man, that's..." Do you need anything? I need to find her. Okay. I can have people search discreetly. Where might she have gone? At this, the subject confronted a profound gap in his knowledge. He lacked information on his wife's support system or potential safe havens. 7 months into their marriage, he could not answer basic questions about her. Try her brother, he said at last. Evan Hart. He lives somewhere in Riverside, I think. You think? I've never been there, the subject admitted, a confession that was psychologically painful. She mentioned a house with a blue door. That's not much. Then figure it out. That is your function. Damien terminated the call, feeling an immediate increase in distress. He recognized that lashing out at his subordinate was a futile displacement of anger. He surveyed the penthouse, 4,700 square feet of real estate that now felt like a mausoleum. Every object was selected for status, not for comfort. He recalled Clara's initial attempts to domesticate the space, with plants he deemed clutter, photos that marred the aesthetic, and meals in a kitchen built for caterers. He had systematically discouraged every effort until she ceased trying. At what point had she become invisible to him? His phone vibrated, displaying a text from an unlisted number. Mr. Vale, the message from Evan Hart was explicit. Clara was secure and had severed direct communication. Future dialogue regarding the infant would be arbitrated by her legal representative. A forthcoming contact was implied. The subject, Damien, processed this information with conflicting surges of narcissistic rage and acute anxiety. His initial diagnosis was that she was retreating, using her sibling and a lawyer as shields. This hypothesis was flawed. Her departure was methodical, evidenced by a composed letter and deliberate planning. She was instituting protective measures against him. The epiphany struck the subject with the force of a somatic blow. Clara was not the variable. He was the pathology. His rejoinder was a bid for control. I need to see her, please, just 5 minutes. The reply was immediate. It stated, she said you'd ask. The answer is no. He followed with, this is my child too. Only to be met with, then you should have thought about that before you sent that picture. Subject Damien then discharged his frustration by projecting his device against a wall. The impact, while audibly significant, caused no damage to the phone. A high-grade, reinforced model, reflecting his pattern of acquiring durable assets. This pattern, it appeared, did not extend to his marital bond. After retrieving the device, he shifted his strategy to feigned remorse. Tell her, I'm sorry. Evan's response was clinically detached. Tell her yourself when you figure out how to be a man instead of a monument. The observation was incisive, penetrating the subject's carefully constructed facade of power. His humanity had been sacrificed for an imposing persona. By nightfall, the subject began experiencing symptoms of agoraphobia within his penthouse. In a significant behavioral deviation, Damien departed the premises without his customary security detail or chauffeur, providing no itinerary. He assimilated into the urban environment, his identity obscured by the crowd. The absence of recognition, deference, or special treatment was disorienting. He was merely another anonymous male navigating the Friday evening surge. This loss of status was both destabilizing and paradoxically liberating. His unguided ambulation terminated before a small diner, a typology of establishment he habitually avoided. The interior featured chrome, vinyl, and fluorescent lighting, with menus exhibiting signs of prolonged use. It was an environment Clara would likely have found appealing. Acting on a rare impulse, he entered. An attendant, identified by her name tag as Bonnie and exhibiting signs of fatigue, directed him toward a window booth with a gesture. Sit anywhere, hun. Coffee? He affirmed. She returned, dispensing the beverage from a pot without inquiring about his preferences. Her observation was direct. You look like you've had a day. Damien experienced a brief impulse to laugh. You could say that. Her reply was formulaic. Well, coffee helps. So does pie. We've got apple and cherry. Apple, he specified, despite having no recent memory of consuming such a dessert. His personal chef specialized in deconstructed, artfully plated cuisine. Pie was an act of rebellion. Bonnie presented a substantial portion of the dessert, its topping of ice cream beginning to liquefy. She refilled his coffee unprompted before retreating. The subject consumed a bite. The flavor profile was sweet, simple, and nutritionally deficient, and registered as the most satisfying gustatory experience in months. He then accessed the digital photograph that had precipitated the marital crisis. It depicted him and a female subject, Sienna, with expressions suggesting complicity and entitlement. The image was time-stamped 10:47 p.m., a period when Clara would have been engaged in nesting behaviors, awaiting his return. The analysis is clear. What type of individual transmits such a stimulus to his pregnant spouse? One who has internalized the belief that inducing fear is superior to receiving love. You okay, hon? The attendant, Bonnie, had returned, her expression indicating concern. My wife left me, Damien vocalized, the admission less difficult on its second iteration. Last night, because I did something unforgivable. Bonnie replenished his coffee, which was not yet depleted. Unforgivable is a strong word. I sent her a photo of me with another woman. She's 7 months pregnant. Oh, honey. The attendant's demeanor shifted from concern to disapproval. That's pretty damn unforgivable. I know. So why'd you do it? Damien ceased eating. Because I'm an idiot who thought being powerful meant I could do whatever I wanted without consequences. And now you're learning different. Bonnie rested against the booth's partition. My second husband tried that. Thought because he made good money and paid the bills, he could treat me however he pleased. You know where he is now? Where? No idea, haven't seen him in 15 years. She straightened her posture. Here's the thing about consequences, hun. They don't care how important you think you are. They show up anyway. She then moved to another patron, leaving the subject to contemplate his dessert, his phone, and the mounting evidence that he had dismantled the sole authentic structure in his meticulously engineered existence. He remained for 2 hours, observing normative social interactions, couples sharing food, a female patron reading in a corner, a laborer consuming a meal at the counter. Ordinary subjects engaged in ordinary lives, none of whom were occupied with empire building or asserting their invulnerability. Upon leaving, he compensated Bonnie at 300% above the standard and re-entered the city. The subsequent weekend was characterized by sleep deprivation and frantic, ineffective planning. The subject attempted multiple vectors to re-establish contact with Clara. Floral arrangements sent to Evan's residence were rejected. An in-person attempt was met by Evan, armed with a baseball bat, who delivered a clear directive to withdraw. He tried to access information on the fetus through Clara's physician. This channel was immediately blocked by patient confidentiality protocols. By Monday morning, his subordinate, Marcus, was present at the penthouse, holding a folder of reports Damien was unable to process, his face displaying marked concern. You look like hell, Marcus stated without preamble. Thanks. When's the last time you slept? Damien dismissed the inquiry. What do the Castellanos want? We're not talking about the Castellanos, we're talking about you. Marcus placed the folder down. I've worked for you for 5 years. I've seen you stare down guys who wanted to kill you without flinching, but right now you look like you're dying. I'm fine. You're not, and everyone's starting to notice. Marcus presented his phone, displaying a series of communications. The Southside crew thinks you're weak. The Moretti family is testing boundaries. 2 of our suppliers have tried to renegotiate terms because they heard you're distracted. Let them try. Damien, listen to me. Your empire is built on you being untouchable, unshakable. The second people think you're vulnerable, they'll come for you. You know this. I know. The subject rubbed his face. I can't think about territory disputes right now. Then what can you think about? Getting my wife back. Marcus paused. And if you can't? The question remained suspended, a psychological contaminant in the room. The subject's entire adult life was founded on the axiom that any objective was attainable. He believed no problem was insoluble with the correct application of capital, influence, or force. Yet Clara was not a territory to be annexed. She was an individual who had reached her breaking point. I don't know, Damien conceded. Okay, then let me handle the business side while you figure it out. But you need to make the decision soon because this holding pattern isn't sustainable. Either you get your head back in the game or what? Marcus maintained direct eye contact. Or you step back and let someone else run things for a while. Maybe that someone is me. Maybe it's a board of advisors. But you can't be half present, not in this world. It'll eat you alive. Following Marcus's departure, Damien observed the city from his window. From a height of 47 floors, all objects appeared diminished and controllable. Problems seemed remote. Repercussions felt theoretical. Yet on the streets below, where individuals conducted their lives, Clara was constructing a new reality that excluded him. His phone vibrated, an unrecognized number. Hello. Mr. Vale, this is Jennifer Reeves. I'm Clara's attorney. The subject's heart rate accelerated. Is she okay? Is the baby? They're both fine. I'm calling to discuss preliminary custody arrangements. I don't want to discuss custody. I want to talk to my wife. Your wife doesn't want to speak with you, but she does want to establish clear boundaries regarding your parental rights. The attorney Jennifer's tone was professional and non-negotiable. Are you available to meet this week? I want to see Clara. That's not on the table. Then nothing is on the table. The subject's own vocal tone shifted to the assertive register he employed in high-stakes negotiations. I'm not discussing my child with a stranger. If Clara wants to make arrangements, she can make them with me directly. Mr. Vale, I understand you're upset, but threatening behavior won't— I'm not threatening anyone. I'm stating a fact. Clara is my wife. That's my baby. If she wants a divorce, fine. If she wants full custody, we'll discuss it. But she doesn't get to hide behind a lawyer and pretend I don't exist. She's not pretending you don't exist. She's protecting herself from someone who hurt her. The statement had the impact of a physical strike. I know what I did. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're more concerned with maintaining control than with acknowledging the harm you caused. Jennifer's professional composure showed a minor fissure. Clara showed me that photo, Mr. Vale. She showed me the letter she left. She told me about the months of being ignored while you built your empire. So, forgive me if I don't have much sympathy for your desire to discuss things directly. Damien closed his eyes. What do you want from me? Clara wants you to leave her alone until after the baby is born. She requires a sterile environment to heal and prepare for childbirth. free from your chaotic stimuli. She has consented to supervised contact postpartum under stringent protocols defining your access. Supervised? As if I pose some risk? You transmitted a digital image of yourself with a paramour to your gravid wife at 10:47 p.m., Mr. Vale. How would one classify such an act if not as a threat? Damien offered no rebuttal. This is the protocol moving forward, Jennifer asserted. I will transmit a proposed custody framework. You will consult legal counsel. We will negotiate the parameters rationally, and if your paternal intent is genuine, you will honor Clara's conditions and grant her the requested distance. And my non-compliance? Then you validate the prevailing diagnosis of your character, and Clara secures sufficient grounds to severely curtail your parental rights. Jennifer's tone modulated slightly. I have operated in this capacity for 15 years, Mr. Vale. I have observed subjects with your profile, powerful, accomplished, certain of their own omnipotence. Some achieve insight before it is too late, others do not. The variable is which archetype you represent. She terminated the connection before he could reply. Damien gazed at his reflection in the phone's dark screen. An unfamiliar subject, unshorn, depleted, with hollowed eyes, a stark deviation from the inviolable persona he had so carefully constructed. The electronic missive from Jennifer manifested 20 minutes later. Damien accessed it on his laptop, absorbing the proposed conditions with escalating cognitive dissonance. Clara was to be granted primary physical custodianship. Damien would be allotted supervised visitations on alternating weekends, conditional on his sobriety and effective stability. He was to provide substantial child support, an amount he could dispense with. He would be divested of all authority in pivotal decisions regarding the child's welfare, upbringing, education, medical treatment, unless Clara initiated consultation. In effect, he would be a remote benefactor, appearing biannually under observation. The document was clinically precise, legally fortified, and psychologically devastating. Damien's primary impulse was to mobilize his own legal counsel and contest every clause, to deploy his resources and influence to frame Clara's position as irrational, to compel a more favorable distribution to achieve victory. He then processed the final paragraph. These terms are structured to insulate the minor from an unstable and potentially harmful environment. Should Mr. Vale exhibit a sustained commitment to personal development, emotional maturity, and a genuine investment in co-parenting, these parameters are subject to review following the child's first year of life. Should Mr. Vale exhibit sustained commitment, Clara was not instituting a punishment. She was presenting a pathway for behavioral modification. This realization precipitated a psychic fracture in Damien's defenses. For 3 days, he had processed this scenario through a lens of victory and defeat, of dominance and submission. This was not a negotiation, however. It was a repercussion. He had systematically treated his pregnant spouse as a peripheral concern. He had transmitted the image with his mistress purely as a demonstration of power. He had erected an empire while allowing his marital structure to decay, and now Clara was executing the strategy he should have adopted months prior. She was selecting tranquility over turmoil, security over status, and attachment over power. Damien closed his laptop, enveloped by the silence of his vacant residence. Beyond, the metropolis throbbed with activity. Within, he was finally isolated with the entity he had become. He found the subject abhorrent. His device vibrated with a new communication from Sienna. Continued avoidance? Please, Damien, we had our amusement. Don't permit one irate wife to negate it all. He regarded the text for a protracted moment. A week prior, Sienna's volatility had registered as stimulating. Her provocations had induced a sense of vitality. Her indifference to consequences had appeared to be a form of liberation. He now perceived her with clarity, a disaffected individual who accumulated powerful men as acquisitions, only to discard them with equal facility. She had no investment in him. Her investment was in the conflict, the subjugation, the spectacle of deconstruction. Damien terminated her access to his number. The action was minor, almost inconsequential within the broader context of his failures. Yet it felt like the first authentic decision he had made in months. That evening, Damien engaged in a behavior he had not practiced since his university years. He induced intoxication in solitude. This was not the pleasant affectation of costly wine, but the sordid, targeted intoxication derived from cheap whiskey consumed with purpose. He sat on his bedroom floor, spine against the bed, and methodically emptied a bottle of Jack Daniels while reviewing his phone's contents. Images of Clara. They were scarce. He had ceased documenting her presence for months, but a few remained from the early phase of their relationship. Clara laughing at some stimulus outside the frame. Clara attired in a sundress at a summer wedding ceremony. Clara dormant against his shoulder during a film, her expression serene and trusting. At what point did his perception of her shift? When was her status reclassified from a beloved partner to a retained possession? He located their wedding photographs. They had married at a municipal building, a result of Damien's insistence that a large ceremony was a fiscal waste. Clara had worn a simple white dress acquired from a retail store, and her state of happiness had been almost painful to observe. She had placed her faith in him, in their union. In the future, they were co-constructing, and his reciprocation, a residence she occupied alone, an infant she was preparing for in isolation. And finally, an image that demolished the last pretense of his affection. Damien's device fell from his grasp as his spatial orientation failed. He sealed his eyes, which only intensified the vertigo. So he opened them to the ceiling, to the recessed lighting that had been a major expenditure, to the custom-milled crown molding. Every feature of this residence was custom designed, every feature except the existence he was meant to be conducting within it. He must have lost consciousness because he awoke on the floor with solar radiation searing through the windows and a cephalalgia that felt like a form of divine retribution. His phone was inert. His mouth held the flavor of regret. His body ached from reclining on hardwood that cost $300 per square foot. Damien propelled himself to the shower, standing under water heated to the point of pain, attempting to purge the hangover, the shame, and the emergent certainty that he had fractured something beyond repair. When he reemerged, Marcus was in the kitchen preparing coffee. "Your method of entry," Damien's voice was abraded. "You provided a key, if you recall." "For contingencies." Marcus poured 2 mugs, offering one to Damien. "This meets the criteria. I'm functional. You are not. But you are also not deceased, which is a positive indicator." Marcus braced himself against the counter. "I came by last night. You were unresponsive on the bedroom floor. I debated summoning medical services." "What stopped you?" "You were respiring, and I surmised you were processing a significant emotional event." Marcus appraised him. "Was it effective?" "What?" "The chemical coping mechanism. Did it yield any resolutions?" Damien drank the coffee. It was potent and black, precisely what he required. It yielded a headache, and the confirmation of my own imbecility. Well, that constitutes a baseline. Marcus put down his mug. So the next step? Now I ratify the custody agreement. Without contest, you are capitulating, I am assimilating reality. Damien took a seat at the kitchen island. Clara is justified in protecting herself and the infant. I have demonstrated that I am untrustworthy, so she is establishing parameters, and I will adhere to them. Marcus arched a brow. Who are you, and what have you done with Damien Vale? Damien Vale is the pathology. Perhaps it's time I reverted to being Daniel. The name felt alien in his own mouth. He had shed it years prior, along with all other traits deemed too soft, too vulnerable, too human. But that may have been the foundational error. Very well, Daniel, Marcus said, testing the designation. What is the operational plan? I haven't formulated one, but I know its antithesis. Damien met his gaze. I will not engage her in conflict. I will not leverage any of my resources for intimidation or control. I will grant Clara the distance she has requested, and I will ascertain how to become someone worthy of a place in that infant's life. And the corporation? You will manage it provisionally until I determine my identity outside the performance of being untouchable. Marcus remained silent for a long interval. You are being sincere. Entirely. This will be perceived by others as a weakness. Let them perceive it. Damien drained his coffee. I have spent years cultivating strength, and the outcome is isolation. Perhaps weakness is the necessary therapeutic agent. After Marcus's departure, Damien composed an email to Jennifer Reeves. He kept it concise and direct. I have reviewed the custody agreement. I accept all terms as stated. Please transmit the final documents for my signature, and please convey to Clara that I am sorry, not with the expectation of forgiveness, but because it is a statement of fact. I am sorry for everything. He sent the message before his resolve could waver. He then moved through the penthouse, truly observing it for the first time in months. The art that Clara had never endorsed, the furniture, impressive in appearance but lacking in comfort, the kitchen designed for professional caterers, not for domestic use, the nursery, immaculate and prepared and completely devoid of life. This was not a home. It was a monument, and monuments are erected for things that have concluded. Damien retrieved his phone and initiated a call. Riverside Realty, Beth speaking. Hello, Beth. I require the sale of a penthouse. The penthouse was sold within 48 hours. 3 offers were submitted above the asking price, each from an individual eager to acquire a section of the sky, to look down upon the city from 47 floors up and feel they had achieved a conquest. The subject, Damien, liquidated the asset with an expediency typically reserved for corporate acquisitions, accepting the first offer without contest. The realtor, Beth, expressed a clinically significant level of confusion, a baseline reaction to such an anomalous financial decision. To her query, "Are you sure you don't want to think about this?" The subject's response was a terse negative. His internal state, however, was one of acute psychological distress. He described the environment of the penthouse as a trigger for recurring traumatic memory, where silence amplified the absence of the primary attachment figure, Clara. The prepared nursery served as a constant, mocking symbol of his failure. Even the panoramic view, a former totem of his narcissism, now functioned solely as a metric of his profound isolation. The subject's associate, Marcus, presented with symptoms of acute distress, interpreting Damien's recent behavior as a potential psychotic break. "You're selling the penthouse, handed me control, not returning calls. The subject's choice of a mundane coffee shop for their meeting was a deliberate environmental shift, an attempt to divest himself of his high-status persona. In this neutral setting, he articulated a nascent desire for self-discovery outside of his performative identity. When confronted about dismantling his life, his affirmation was simple. Apparently. He identified the penthouse not as a domicile, but as a psychological statement, a physical manifestation of his grandiose self-concept, which he now sought to deconstruct. "I'm done making statements," the subject declared, signaling a rejection of his performative grandiosity. His planned relocation to a modest dwelling in Riverside was a strategic maneuver to place himself in proximity to his estranged partner and unborn child. Marcus's physiological shock response, nearly choking on his espresso, underscores the radical nature of this behavioral shift. The subject's rationale was clear. A pathological focus on empire building had resulted in the loss of all meaningful attachments. His new therapeutic strategy involved a complete inversion of his former life principles, an attempt to undo the damage by reversing some behaviors that caused it. Marcus articulated the external consequences of the subject's withdrawal, noting that rivals perceived this behavioral shift as a sign of weakness. Power vacuums were forming. There were rumors of a complete abdication. The subject's response, "let them talk," indicated a profound reprioritization of psychic energy from external dominance to internal reconciliation. He then initiated a symbolic reversion to a former identity, requesting to be addressed as Daniel. Marcus, while complying, reinforced the reality principle. The construct of the empire and its attendant responsibilities could not be simply willed away. The subject's delegation of power was framed not as an abdication, but as a temporary state, contingent upon his achieving a new psychological baseline, becoming someone worth coming home to. The physical move was executed as a ritualistic purge. All artifacts of his former high-status life, custom furniture, art, designer goods, were expunged. The only retained objects were utilitarian items and a collection of infant clothing, a transitional object linking him to his stated therapeutic goal. This paring down was a concrete manifestation of his desire to get small, get quiet, get real. The new residence was selected for its normative qualities: modesty, simplicity, and its location within a community of functioning family units. The subject reported finding the ambient sounds of suburban life, stimuli absent from his former sterile environment, to be therapeutic. The moving truck driver provided an external normative assessment, labeling the transition a downgrade. This highlights the schism between societal metrics of success and the subject's new internal value system. The subject perceived the move as an upgrade, a clear indicator of his psychological shift. The subject unpacked his few belongings with methodical deliberation, creating order in his new, smaller environment. He engaged in an act of symbolic humility by consuming a standard pizza while seated on the floor, reporting that the sensory experience surpassed that of meals prepared by his private chef. This suggests the emotional context of consumption had become more significant than the quality of the food itself. The act was less about sustenance and more about grounding himself in a non-performative, regular existence. Communication with the subject's legal counsel, Jennifer Reeves, confirmed the passive acceptance of the custody agreement and the transfer of a significant sum of money to Clara. The funds were rejected. This rejection served as a powerful boundary-setting act by Clara, refusing to allow the dynamic to be mediated by financial dependency. The subject registered this rejection as a narcissistic injury. The word stung. but also demonstrated a rudimentary understanding of her motivation, acknowledging her desire to not be bought or maintained. The subject attempted to reframe the financial transfer as being for the child, a common tactic to circumvent personal rejection. His inquiries regarding Clara's condition were met with professionally mandated confidentiality. The attorney then offered unsolicited feedback, noting that his complete capitulation on the custody agreement was a behavioral anomaly for an individual with his profile. His failure to fight or leverage his resources was observed as a significant deviation from expected patterns of behavior for high-conflict personalities. The attorney's observation, "that matters," provided external validation for the subject's passive stance. He articulated his new objective, shifting from a model of winning to one of deserving, a fundamental change in his motivational structure. Following the call, the subject reported experiencing what he termed fragile, terrifying hope. This paradoxical emotional state is characteristic of early-stage recovery, where positive affect is perceived as novel and precarious after a prolonged period of crisis and negative self-concept. A direct confrontation occurred with Evan Hart, the brother of the aggrieved party. Evan exhibited predictable hostility and suspicion, questioning the authenticity of the subject's relocation. Damien rationalized his proximity as a contingency for emergencies. Evan countered this by confronting the subject with the emotional impact of his past actions, citing Clara's 3-day crying spell as a direct consequence. This forced the subject to face the tangible, emotional trauma he had inflicted. Evan accused the subject of engaging in a performance of reform, a sophisticated, manipulative tactic designed to regain access to his sister. He posited that the subject's actions were motivated by a narcissistic need for a redemption arc. The challenge was issued: prove the change is genuine by maintaining complete distance, thereby allowing the victim space to heal. This presented the subject with a therapeutic paradox. Demonstrate closeness through absence. The subject reported an internal conflict between his ingrained, aggressive instincts and his new therapeutic goals. He successfully inhibited the impulse to argue, prioritizing Clara's need for psychological safety over his own desire for proximity. His capitulation, okay, marked a significant behavioral victory. He then articulated his attachment to Clara, qualifying it with self-aware descriptors like selfishly and destructively, indicating an improved capacity for insight into his own pathological behaviors. The subject's non-combative response appeared to modulate Evan's hostility. Evan then disclosed critical data about Clara's psychological state. She presented with a classic approach avoidance conflict: fear of repeated injury versus sadness, and a persistent attachment to a pre-pathological version of the subject. This suggests the presence of a significant trauma bond, wherein the victim struggles to reconcile the memory of the good individual with the reality of the abusive one, complicating her emotional recovery. The subject's denial was immediately countered with a catalog of symptomatic neglect. His prioritization of professional engagements, communication failures, and persistent depersonalization of his partner were cited. The assessment concluded that Clara had been rendered psychologically invisible, a state deemed more insidious than overt abandonment. This diagnosis triggered a profound cognitive dissonance in Damien, who acknowledged his objectification of Clara as an environmental fixture. He verbalized a desire for behavioral modification, a sentiment met with skepticism regarding its viability. The challenge to enact this change was issued as Evan departed, at which point he introduced a key piece of evidence, a letter retained by Clara. The subject showed no immediate recollection of the artifact. Evan specified it was from their courtship period, a document outlining aspirations for partnership and self-betterment. He clarified that Clara's grief was for the author of that letter, the subject's baseline personality, not the narcissistic king persona he had adopted. Post-intervention, Damien displayed a compulsive need to locate a copy of this correspondence among his personal effects. The artifact was dated 4 years prior, from the relationship's formative stage. A graphological review suggested a less rigid psychological state at the time of its creation. The text contained a self-aware inventory of deficits and a series of behavioral promises. Clara, I know I'm not easy. I promise I'll choose you every day. It was signed with his given name, Daniel. The subject recognized a total violation of this self-authored contract. He then placed the document in his wallet, repurposing it as a totemic object for his intended psychological rehabilitation. The subsequent weeks were a period of intense environmental and psychological dislocation. Damien experienced his new residence as foreign and his professional identity as void. The resulting silence was a vacuum, producing both calm and acute anxiety, which led to obsessive rumination. He initiated a program of behavioral restructuring through mundane tasks, domestic duties, literary engagement, and practicing social anonymity in Riverside. This culminated in his decision to seek professional therapeutic intervention. The therapeutic setting was a nondescript office in a commercial plaza. The clinician, Dr. Sarah Chen, a woman in her 50s, maintained a professional detachment from the subject's history. Following an intake, she posed a central diagnostic question about what he was running from. Damien offered a defensive reframing, insisting he was building. Dr. Chen deconstructed this narrative, positing that his constant acquisition and achievement resembled flight more than construction. The therapeutic objective was thus established to identify the root of this flight response. Sessions revealed formative trauma rooted in socioeconomic precarity during childhood. His parents' financial instability had instilled in him a profound fear of vulnerability. This led to a pathological compensation, the creation of an empire as an elaborate defense mechanism against needing anyone. During their 5th session, Dr. Chen probed Clara's role in this structure. Damien confessed that Clara had breached these defenses by perceiving his core self, an event he reported as terrifying. The subject affirmed this terror, explaining it stemmed from a core belief of being unworthy of love behind his performance. This fear drove a strategy of preemptive abandonment. I made her invisible, he explained. If she couldn't see me, I couldn't disappoint her. When confronted about the incriminating photograph, he initially cited intoxication and a need for control. The clinician offered a cognitive reframing. The act was self-sabotage, designed to force her departure before she chose it herself. This insight was deeply unsettling for Damien. He then solicited a therapeutic directive. Dr. Chen advised a regimen of radical acceptance, of consequences, and of the need for internal development, irrespective of external validation from Clara. Concurrently, updates from his lieutenant, Marcus, concerning the Empire's stability, failed to elicit his previous level of engagement. When confronted by Marcus about his disinterest, Damien confirmed a cognitive awareness, but a profound emotional detachment from these matters. In explaining the shift, Damien articulated that he now viewed his pursuit of power as a cognitive error and had begun to de-identify from his empire. When asked who he was now, he indicated the process of identity reconstruction was ongoing. 2 months after the separation, a chance encounter occurred at a grocery store. He observed Clara, now 8 months pregnant, exhibiting an emotional state of serenity he had never witnessed during their relationship. She was engaged in the mundane task of selecting produce with intense focus. Her appearance struck him as more authentic than the artifice of his former life. His initial impulse to approach her was suppressed by a cognitive intervention, recalling Evan's counsel. Observing her from a distance, he noted her apparent contentment. This triggered an effective shift from possessiveness to gratitude, as he reframed her departure as an escape from the toxic environment he had created. His internal assessment concluded she had chosen stability over his chaos. Exhibiting behavioral restraint, he waited for her to leave before completing his own shopping, a psychosomatic tremor noted in his hand. That evening, he composed a formal letter, a deliberate and non-impulsive act of communication. It began not with demands, but with validation. "Clara, I saw you today at the grocery store. You looked happy. I'm glad. I'm writing to know I'm not the man who sent that photo anymore." The text provided evidence of his therapeutic progress. Divesting from the penthouse, relocating, therapy, and delegating business operations. He expressed a desire to shed his grandiose persona for a more authentic life. He explicitly stated his motive was not to win you back, but to become a person worthy of their child's esteem and to retroactively validate her past affection for him. The letter closed with non-transactional well wishes for her and the baby, signed with his birth name Daniel. He mailed the correspondence the next day, an act of release without expectation. 3 days later, a response in Clara's handwriting arrived. The subject displayed a recurring psychosomatic tremor upon opening it. Her letter conveyed a marked ambivalence, torn between hope for his change and skepticism born of his past patterns of behavior. She was not ready to trust, but she acknowledged that Evan's third-party validation of his recent conduct was a significant factor. The baby was due in 4 weeks. She detailed her preparations and her emotional state of concurrent excitement and terror. She confirmed her grief was for his idealized former self, the man who wrote letters and demonstrated care. She expressed hope that this persona still existed, primarily for the child's benefit. Damien analyzed the letter 5 times, searching for prognostic indicators. The clinical conclusion, forgiveness was withheld, but the door for future communication was not entirely closed. This was a level of consideration beyond his merits, yet sufficient to sustain his efforts. He replied with a carefully worded message. "Your acknowledgement is noted. I will maintain my efforts. I will maintain my presence. Upon the infant's arrival, I will assume whatever role you deem necessary, including that of a remote financial provider with structured visitation. You are not isolated in this, despite any perceptions to the contrary. My proximity is 5 minutes for any requirement at any time. Daniel." The correspondence persisted in subsequent weeks. Terse, functional exchanges between 2 subjects, negotiating the untenable space between their past and potential future. Clara reported on her cravings for pickles and ice cream. He reported on incinerating a meal and learning basic culinary skills via online tutorials. She noted the fetus was most active nocturnally, impacting her rib cage. He confessed to acquiring a text on paternity, uncertain if the knowledge would ever be applied. The photograph remained an unacknowledged variable. Neither subject broached topics of marital dissolution or reconciliation, focusing solely on the immediate biological reality. An infant was imminent. Both were attempting to prepare. 4 weeks elapsed, then 3, then 2. Daniel organized his modest residence, procuring diapers and formula as a contingency, assembling a crib he might never see occupied, and studying all available parenting literature. Then, on a Tuesday at 23:30 hours, his communication device activated. It was Evan's number. Daniel's cardiac function momentarily ceased. "Hello, it is time." Evan's vocal tone was strained with suppressed alarm. "Her membranes have ruptured. Our destination is Riverside General. She requested I contact you. I am en route." Daniel secured his keys and initiated rapid movement. The 15-minute journey to Riverside General Hospital was completed in 8. His grip on the steering wheel induced pallor in his knuckles. Each traffic signal was an intolerable delay, each slower vehicle an obstruction to the pivotal event. "She requested I contact you." These 5 words repeated in his mind, a cognitive loop reinforcing his sanctioned presence. Clara could have proceeded without him, relying solely on Evan's support. Yet she had summoned him. Following the initial trauma, the betrayal, the months of non-communication, she had requested his presence. The hospital's vehicle lot was sparsely populated at this hour. Daniel left his car in the nearest available space and moved through the automated doors into the lobby's fluorescent glare. A fatigued receptionist diverted her attention from a monitor. "Labor and delivery," Daniel stated, his respiration compromised. "Clara Vale, my wife, she was just admitted." The receptionist's data entry was tortuously slow. "3rd floor. Utilize the elevators to your left. Report to the nurses' station." Daniel was already in motion. The elevator's arrival was delayed, and it paused on the 2nd floor for an orderly with an unoccupied gurney. Finally, the 3rd floor. The doors opened to a corridor scented with antiseptic and a sense of imminence. The nurse's station was directly ahead. A young nurse with a non-threatening expression looked up. "I am here for Clara Vale. I am her. I'm Daniel, her husband." The nurse consulted a chart. "She is assigned to room 314. But, sir, it is my duty to inform you, she is only at 3 centimeters dilation. The duration could be considerable. Primiparous labor is often—" "The duration is irrelevant. I require access to her." The nurse's professional demeanor softened. "Room 314 is located down the hall to your right. Her brother is currently with her. Proceed with caution, understood?" "Her pain levels are high." Daniel acknowledged and proceeded down the hallway, on limbs experiencing a sense of somatic detachment. The door was ajar, and through the opening he could detect Clara's voice, constricted by pain. "I cannot complete this. Evan, I am incapable. The pain is too severe. You are capable. You are the most resilient individual I know. You abandoned a man who was unworthy of you at 7 months gestation. You reconstructed your entire existence. You are absolutely capable of this." Daniel paused outside the threshold, immobilized. One impulse was to breach the room, to provide support, to mitigate her suffering. But a secondary, more disciplined impulse, one acquired through recent behavioral modification, recognized the necessity of receiving clearance first. He knocked with minimal force. The dialogue within ceased. Then, Evan's voice. "Enter." Daniel actuated the door. The room's environment was sterile and utilitarian. A hospital bed with softly beeping monitors, a chair occupied by Evan, a window with a view of the parking area, and on the bed, Clara. She already presented signs of significant fatigue. Her hair was restrained, her complexion pallid, but for 2 patches of color on her zygomatic arches. She was attired in a hospital gown, one hand resting in a protective posture over her gravid abdomen. Upon registering Daniel's presence, a complex emotional response flickered across her face. Perhaps relief, perhaps fear, or an amalgam too intricate to categorize. "You are here," her voice was faint. "You requested my presence." Daniel remained near the entrance, uncertain of his territorial permissions. I will always respond to your summons. Evan rose from his seat. I am going to procure coffee, to provide you two a moment. He paused beside Daniel, his voice lowered. Do not cause me to regret this call. He then exited, leaving Daniel and Clara in isolation for the first time in 3 months. How are you feeling? Daniel inquired, a query of questionable utility given the circumstances. Clara produced a near smile, as if a person is attempting to excavate an exit from my body. The contractions are approximately 6 minutes apart. The physician indicates a protracted night. May I? Daniel gestured to the chair Evan had left. May I sit? Yes, please. He moved with deliberation, as if any abrupt action might revoke the fragile consent she had offered. From this proximity, the subject's somatic stress responses were observable, deep lines of distress framing her mouth and fine tremors in her hands. Clara confirmed receipt of his communications, stating, I received your letters, all of them. I did not require a reply to each. It was enough that you were considering my state and the child's. I know, and it was a comfort to know you were making an effort. A uterine contraction initiated a full-body rigor. Damien observed, functionally impotent as she implemented a breathing exercise, vocalizing a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The spasm subsided, leaving a state of depletion. What is my function here? Damien inquired. I require a task. There is none. You are to wait. We both must. What? Her gaze met his. A direct assessment, the first since his arrival. You appear altered. I am altered. How? The subject paused, processing how to articulate 3 months of psychological restructuring. The therapeutic interventions, the managed solitude, the dismantling of his internal, megalomaniacal framework. I divested from the penthouse, he began. Relocated to Riverside, I transferred operational control of the enterprise to Marcus. I initiated therapy twice weekly, where I learned my ambition was a flight from vulnerability. Clara displayed mild surprise. You are in therapy? For 2 months, yes. It appears I have significant issues to process, such as erecting an empire as a defense mechanism against a profound fear of powerlessness, such as making you invisible because you perceived my authentic self, a reality more terrifying than any business adversary, such as transmitting that photograph because a damaged component of my psyche sought to destroy our marriage before you could recognize you were entitled to better. The statements remained in the space between them, Clara's expression inscrutable. Dr. Chen, my therapist, classifies me as a work in progress, Daniel added. That recovery is nonlinear, that I will regress. But I am trying, Clara. I am genuinely trying to become an individual worthy of being this child's father and perhaps eventually worthy of being your partner again. Daniel. Clara paused, amending her address from the detached Damien to the more intimate name he had requested years prior. I am not certain we can regress to a former state. I know. I am not requesting a regression. I am requesting an opportunity to progress differently. Before Clara could reply, another contraction began. This one was of greater intensity. She gasped, her hand seizing the bed rail. Instinctively, Daniel reached for her other hand. She gripped it with painful force, her nails impressing upon his palm as she endured the wave of pain. Breathe, he said softly. You are secure. I am with you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He counted with her through the episode, his voice steady despite his own elevated heart rate. When it subsided, Clara did not release his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Always." Evan returned with coffee and paused at the doorway, assessing the scene. Daniel and Clara, hands joined, a fragile, hopeful dynamic materializing in the space between them. "Contraction?" Evan inquired. "A significant one," Clara confirmed. "Their frequency is increasing." Evan presented her a cup of ice chips. "The nurse authorized these. No other intake is permitted until post-delivery." The subsequent hours fused into a bizarre, suspended state of reality. Contractions cycled, each more potent than the last. The physician made periodic checks, quantifying progress with clinical detachment. 4 centimeters, 5, 6. Clara's pain escalated in tandem with her exhaustion. Daniel remained. Evan had proposed a rotation to allow him rest, but Daniel declined. Each time Clara's hand sought support during a contraction, his was present. Each request for ice chips, a cool cloth, or simply a voice to guide her breathing, he fulfilled. Around 300 hours with Clara at 7 centimeters dilation and weeping from the pain, she looked at Daniel with reddened eyes. "I am afraid," she confessed. "Of what?" "Of all of it. Of escalating pain, of a complication, of being an inadequate mother, of facing this alone." "You are not alone," Daniel stated with conviction. "I am here. Evan is here. You are surrounded by people who love you, and you will be an exceptional mother." "How can you know that?" "Because you left me in order to protect this baby." "You prioritized security over the known comforts of your previous environment. This demonstrates a capacity for the difficult choices inherent in effective parenting." Clara's laugh was thin, laced with moisture. An assessment with a negative framing. "It is a factual observation." Damien applied pressure to her hand. "Upon this child's arrival, irrespective of our relational status, I will be present for all nocturnal feedings, all clinical appointments, every instance you require support. I will manifest the paternal role I outlined in my correspondence 4 years prior." "The letter," Clara stated flatly. "I reviewed it last week. You pledged to select me on a daily basis." "A pledge I violated. I am aware. I now request the opportunity to establish a new one, to choose you both every day for the remainder of my life." Before a response could be formulated, the physician entered. Dr. Patricia Morrison, a woman in her 50s, projected calm competence, the demeanor of one who had presided over thousands of births and understood the associated psychological dramas. "We will now assess your progress," she stated, donning gloves. After a brief examination, she offered a clinical smile. "You've reached 10 centimeters, Clara. It is time to initiate expulsion." The statement triggered a palpable spike of anxiety within the room. Clara's grip on Damien's hand became pathological. "I am unprepared. I am incapable." "Your assessment is incorrect," Dr. Morrison said with authority. "Your body has reached readiness. The infant is ready. We require you to align your mental state with your physiological state." Her gaze shifted to Damien. "Father, will you remain?" Damien's focus returned to Clara. "Do you require my presence?" Clara's eyes were dilated, reflecting fear, pain, and a nascent element of hope. "Yes, please, I need you. I need you." 3 words that recalibrated the entire dynamic. "Then my position is fixed," Damien affirmed. Evan stationed himself on Clara's opposite side. Nursing staff reconfigured the bed and monitors, preparing the space with an automated efficiency. Dr. Morrison assumed her station. "Very well, Clara. With the next uterine contraction, you will exert maximum force." a significant downward push, as if attempting the most profound, bowel movement of your life. Under different conditions, the analogy might have been humorous. In this context, it was merely stark. The contraction surged, and Clara complied, her face congesting with the effort. Damien provided a verbal count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Simultaneously, Evan offered encouragement from his position. Acceptable, Dr. Morrison noted. That is good. Now rest. We repeat the process with the next contraction. They settled into a physiological rhythm. Contraction, expulsion, rest. The cycle repeated. Clara's systemic exhaustion was observable, her output diminishing with each attempt. Perspiration saturated her hair. Her gown adhered to her skin, yet she persisted in the effort, exhibiting a determination to bring their child forth that registered to Damien as awe-inspiring. I can visualize the cranium, Dr. Morrison announced. Clara, you are approaching the conclusion. A few more effective pushes. I cannot, Clara vocalized through sobs. My energy is depleted. I cannot do it. Yes, you can. Damien's voice was intense. You are the most resilient subject I have ever encountered. You survived my pathology. You survived the act of leaving. You can unequivocally survive this. Our child is imminent. A minimal increase in effort is required. Clara met his gaze, lacrimal fluid coursing down her face, and nodded. As the next contraction peaked, she pushed with all her remaining physiological resources. That is it, Dr. Morrison exclaimed. The head is delivered. One final push for the shoulders. Clara emitted a scream through the final exertion, a sound blending agony with triumph. Then abruptly, a new auditory stimulus entered the environment. An infant crying. The infant is female, Dr. Morrison declared, elevating a small, crimson, vocally protesting organism. You have produced a daughter. Time ceased its linear progression. Everything Damien had previously assigned value, the empire, the authority, the wealth, the status, dematerialized when confronted with this small, perfect, vocalizing human. His daughter, their daughter. The nurses performed a swift cleaning and placed her on Clara's chest. The infant's cries modulated to whimpers, then ceased as she registered her mother's cardiac rhythm. Clara's hands rose to cradle her, tears of exhaustion, joy, and relief flowing freely. Hello, infant girl, Colligist, Clara whispered. Hello, we have anticipated your arrival. Damien was nonverbal, immobile, his respiration shallow. He fixated on the pair, his partner and his daughter, and perceived a structural fracture within his own psyche. This was not the fragmentation he experienced upon Clara's departure, but something different, a form of psychological rebirth. Do you wish to sever the cord, Father? A nurse inquired, offering him surgical scissors. Damien looked to Clara. She nodded, still weeping, still smiling. With trembling hands, Damien cut the umbilical cord that had been the 9-month conduit between his daughter and her mother. The nurse briefly took the infant for clinical measurements, announcing data that Damien barely registered. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, 20 inches long, perfect APGAR scores. The infant was then returned to Clara's chest, swaddled, her face compressed and red, and objectively beautiful. She has your nasal structure, Clara observed softly, and your mandible. She has your eyes, Damien countered. Observe them. Evan, who had been quietly weeping in a corner, approached. She is perfect, Clara. You succeeded. We succeeded, Clara amended, her gaze directed at Damien. All of us. Dr. Morrison completed her final procedures and withdrew. I will allow for a period of family bonding. Congratulations to you all. Once they were isolated, Damien, Clara, Evan, and the infant, the room adopted a hushed, reverential silence. The baby produced small vocalizations as she acclimated to the extrauterine environment. Clara appeared depleted but luminous, one hand resting protectively on their daughter. Had you considered names? Evan asked. I had compiled a list, Clara said, but observing her now, none seem appropriate. She looked at Damien. What is your input? The query felt like an offering of trust, a gesture of partnership, the opening of a closed door. What of Emma? Damien proposed. Its meaning is whole or universal? Complete. Clara silently processed the name, looking down at their daughter. Emma. Emma Vale. A smile formed. I approve. Emma is her designation. The baby, Emma, yawned. A minute, flawless display of tranquility, and Damien experienced an emotion that had been absent for years. Not power, not control, not the gratification of an acquisition, but love. Pure, simple, overwhelming love. May I? His voice fractured. May I hold her? Clara's eyes scanned his face, searching for some data point. Whatever she observed seemed to satisfy her as she carefully transferred the small, warm bundle into Damien's arms. Emma's mass felt simultaneously negligible and infinite. Damien supported her against his chest, paralyzed by the fear of error, amazed by her minuscule digits and perfect cilia, and the manner in which she seemed to instinctively trust his capacity to ensure her safety. Hello, Emma, he whispered. I am your father, and I promise you. I promise I will perform better for you than I did for your mother. I will be present, I will be engaged, I will love you with such intensity that you will never experience a moment of doubt. Tears now streamed down his face unmanaged. It was of no consequence. Let them fall. Let the psychological armor fracture. Let him be vulnerable before this small entity who would never value his empire or his wealth or his power. She would only value his presence, and he would provide it every day for the remainder of his life. Daniel, Clara said softly. He looked up. Her expression was unreadable. Thank you, she said, for being here, for showing up. I acknowledge it does not resolve all issues, but it is significant. I will continue to show up, Damien vowed, for as long as you permit it. Evan cleared his throat. I am going to grant you, too, a measure of privacy. Contact me if you require assistance. He kissed Clara's forehead, regarded Emma with wonder, and departed. Alone with Clara and their daughter, Damien cautiously sat in the chair beside the bed, Emma still secure in his arms. She had entered a sleep state, her tiny chest rising and falling rhythmically. She is perfect, he stated. She is, Clara observed them both. I harbored intense anger toward you for months. I wished to hate you, to excise you completely and raise her in isolation. Such a reaction would have been justified, perhaps. But then your letters began arriving, and Evan informed me of your relocation to Riverside, and I observed you in the grocery store, looking disoriented in the produce aisle. Clara's smile was minimal but genuine. You appeared so normal, so human. Not the monarch who fractured my heart, just Daniel, the man with whom I formed an attachment. Damien's throat constricted. I am attempting to navigate my way back to being him. I can perceive that, but Daniel, I require you to understand one thing. Clara's tone became serious. I cannot endure this again. I cannot be rendered invisible. I cannot be secondary to an empire. If you are serious about participating in Emma's life, in our lives, conditions must be different. They will be. I have already initiated changes. Initiation is easy, sustenance is difficult. Clara shifted in the bed, wincing. I need to know that when difficulties arise, when the business demands your attention, when power presents a temptation, you will still choose us. Not merely today, in this clinical setting with our newborn daughter, but next month, next year, 10 years from now. I will. You made that promise before, in the letter. I know, and I violated that promise. I have no standing to ask for your belief now. Damien looked down at Emma, at her serene, sleeping face. But I am asking regardless. Grant me a chance to provide proof. We do not need to be married. We do not need to cohabitate. We need only be two individuals who love this small girl and desire her optimal outcome. Allow me to demonstrate, through actions rather than words, that I have changed. Clara remained silent for a long moment. What does that look like in practical terms? I remain in my residence in Riverside. The subject, Damien, outlined a protocol for conditional re-engagement. He would perform all necessary paternal duties for the infant, Emma, to re-establish a baseline of trust through predictable behavior. The subject, Clara, sought confirmation that his typical methods of manipulation, financial inducements, or grand proclamations would cease. He affirmed the new strategy involved only a consistent mundane presence. This simulation of devotion, framed as paternal care at 3 a.m, elicited a significant emotional response in Clara. Her stated desire to believe him is noted. The infant was then transferred to the maternal subject. Upon physical contact with Clara, the infant's distress ceased. A predictable biological response. A naming convention for the child was then discussed. Damien proposed grace, assigning it a quasi-theological meaning of unmerited transformation. Clara acknowledged this act of performative depth. A period of silence ensued as both subjects processed the fundamental shift in their dynamic. The infant's birth had initiated a new family structure with an uncertain trajectory. Medical staff later entered to commence standard postnatal procedures. A hospital observation period of 1 to 2 days was mandated for both Clara and Emma, with visitation limits. Hospital protocol granted Damien continuous access. He deferred to Clara's preference regarding his presence, a tactical maneuver to cede perceived control. Following a marked hesitation, she consented. Damien then executed his stated intention, observing the initial feeding and the primary pediatric examination. He demonstrated excessive diligence, interrogating the physician on topics from sleep cycles to the composition of neonatal fecal matter. The subject maintained his vigil overnight, exhibiting a hyper-aroused state in response to infant vocalizations. In a pre-dawn interval, he delivered a monologue to the child, verbalizing a commitment to behavioral change for Clara's benefit. He articulated a new value system, prioritizing attachment over power, and centered on the infant's preeminence. He interpreted the infant's palmar grasp reflex as an affirmation of his intent, a clear instance of narcissistic projection. He framed this period as a chance to reconstruct his persona from marital antagonist to a functional father. The initial 2 weeks involved sleep deprivation and a steep learning curve. Clara remained at a neutral third-party residence, while Damien executed a daily regimen of contact. He abandoned grand gestures for meticulous consistency, arriving at 700 hours with provisions selected based on his observations of Clara's habits. He participated in care routines, his dexterity improving through repetition. he assumed infant care to allow Clara's postpartum recovery. The third party, Avon, observed this behavior with skepticism, anticipating a regression to baseline pathology. Damien's persona shifted from an intimidating figure to the archetype of a fatigued parent, evidenced by his disheveled appearance and use of infantile songs. Evan confronted Damien during a 600 hours bottle preparation. In response, Damien externalized his motivation, attributing his behavioral shift entirely to the infant's influence. Damien expanded his stated motivation to include Clara. Evan warned that Clara's forgiveness was not a foreseeable outcome. Damien performed an attitude of patience, stating his only goal was proximity. A rigid daily schedule emerged, dividing his focus between infant care and critical business tasks. This routine, while exhausting, reportedly provided a sense of meaning, likely a source of narcissistic supply derived from successful role performance. 3 weeks postpartum, Clara requested to see his home. She framed the request as a logistical inquiry concerning potential custody. Damien exhibited a physiological stress response, but gave immediate assent. He observed her arrival the next day, noting her practiced maternal efficiency. He mentally contrasted her current appearance favorably against her prior persona, which he associated with loneliness and material excess, indicating a recalibration of his own possessive criteria. He initiated contact before she could knock, displaying social anxiety while making a calculated statement of humility about the dwelling. The interior was austere, contrasting sharply with their former environment. A fully equipped nursery was positioned as the central exhibit, tangible proof of his preparedness. Clara noted the installation. He explained it was to demonstrate his capability for unsupervised care. Damien highlighted the residence's primary attributes as safe and proximate. Clara's inspection revealed further props supporting his new role, culinary and parenting manuals. A strategically placed photograph from a stable period in their relationship was located in his bedroom. When she noted the artifact, he delivered a rehearsed line about misprioritizing what was important. This feigned insight is a common manipulative tactic. The infant's stirring provided a cue for Damien to guide Clara into the nursery he had prepared. She complied, feeding their child in the designated space. Observing the scene, Damien experienced an intense emotional response, equating the tableau with the normative concept of home. At this point, Clara directly questioned a past manipulative act involving a photo, a confrontation Damien had clearly anticipated. Adopting a non-threatening posture on the floor, Damien began his confession. He cited intoxication and a need for control, then invoked a therapeutic authority, Dr. Chen. To legitimize a deeper analysis based on fear, he constructed a sympathetic narrative of a persona built to conceal childhood-rooted insecurities. His stated terror was that Clara would see his authentic self and deem him unworthy of attachment, thereby confirming a core negative belief. Clara accurately identified his behavior as preemptive sabotage intended to maintain an illusion of control. Damien immediately affirmed her assessment, a validating maneuver that caused her to label his confession as profoundly honest. The infant was now asleep. Damien acknowledged the permanent harm but shifted focus to future actions, a tactic to sidestep full culpability. Clara concluded the exchange by surveying the room he had constructed for this purpose. The neonatal environment, with its Spartan crib and organized supplies, served as a clinical backdrop. Clara issued a verbal challenge to his claimed metamorphosis, demanding empirical evidence of his current life beyond the paternal role. Damien submitted to a period of total observation. She witnessed his therapeutic sessions from a remove and noted his new, methodical approach to financial management. a behavior starkly misaligned with his past reliance on capital to resolve conflict. She observed his attempts at domestic tasks, noting his ineptitude with a degree of amusement when he incinerated a part of the meal. She commented on the absence of his chef, a marker of his former status. He acknowledged the humbling nature of self-sufficiency. The arrival of his lieutenant, Marcus, introduced an external variable whose shock at Damien's downsized existence was palpable. When questioned about his state of mind, Damien, looking at Clara, confirmed he was progressing toward it. He conceded the validity of Marcus's perception of his insanity. He was, however, not losing his mind, but finding it. Damien recontextualized his former empire, the power, the violence, the wealth, as distracting noise. This new reality, he asserted, was authentic. With Emma's care as his primary objective, the fate of his criminal enterprise was irrelevant. He now only sought to construct a viable relationship with his daughter. He then proposed an attempt at repairing their own fractured bond. Clara's response was ambivalent. She articulated residual anger, linking it to the hardships of lone parenting stemming from his betrayal. Yet his consistent to non-reciprocal support confused her. This cognitive dissonance manifested as a critical question. Was this a genuine psychological shift or a more refined manipulation tactic? Damien asserted that his authenticity could not be proven through grand gestures, but only through sustained, monotonous, reliable presence over a long duration. This was his sole offer. Clara looked at the sleeping infant in her arms. The child required a consistent paternal figure, one who would choose her unconditionally. He vowed to be that figure. Clara then asked what she herself deserved, a query laden with unresolved trauma and future potential. Damien replied, "You deserve a partner who is present and chooses you." He paused, admitting he could not guarantee perfection but requested the opportunity to attempt this new mode of being. Clara's emotional defenses breached. She verbalized her grief for their past shared reality and the narcissistic injury his abandonment had caused her. He agreed an apology was insufficient but necessary as an initial gesture. He requested not forgiveness, but a probationary period to demonstrate his capacity for genuine change. Emma's developmental milestones marked the passage of months. Damien's behavioral consistency remained unwavering. He was present for every event, documenting them for Clara, who was typically also in attendance. Gradually, Clara's defensive posture softened, permitting him greater access to her and the infant's life. She began exhibiting renewed personal ambition, discussing a return to her university studies. He offered unconditional support. When she mentioned she studied psychology to become a therapist, Damien noted her aptitude for reading people. She countered with the exception of his own self-destructive pathology. He acknowledged his skill at concealment and her tendency toward positive attribution. He insisted on facilitating her return to academia, framing it as rectifying his past self-centered neglect. This exchange was interrupted by a call from Marcus. A rival syndicate, the Castellanos, had tendered an acquisition offer for his entire operation. The sum proposed was $60 million. Damien received this information while observing Clara and Emma in the yard. When asked for his counsel, Marcus noted that Damien's former self would have violently rejected the offer. He advised him to accept it now. Damien confirmed his psychological disengagement from that identity was permanent. "Sell it," he instructed. "Walk away." He verbalized the insight that the empire was a maladaptive construct, a truth he only understood after losing what was truly valuable. The deal was finalized 3 weeks later. Damien signed documents transferring his entire network to the Castellanos. The capital was divided. Half was placed in a trust for Emma. A quarter was donated to anti-poverty charities reflecting his origins. and the rest was invested for a quiet life. He then invited Clara and Emma to a modest dinner, framing it as a celebration. The event would mark the dissolution of his empire and the start of a new life. Clara agreed, stipulating the venue be unpretentious. They functioned as a family unit at a local Italian restaurant. Damien disclosed the sale of his enterprise and the profound relief it brought him. He outlined his philanthropic intentions. Was he completely disengaged from it all? Clara inquired. The power, the fear, utterly. He labeled his former life a performance. This, gesturing to their small table in the mundane setting, was reality. This is real. Clara reached out, initiating physical contact for the first time since the birth. The gesture registered as a significant physiological event for Damien. She expressed pride in his demonstrated capacity to change. He asked if this signaled a shift. It means I'm ready to build something new, she clarified. A common parental distraction then occurred, and the profound banality of the moment triggered an acute emotional response in Damien. He recognized this feeling of connection was the core need his former life of power had failed to fulfill. Attachment, presence, affection. 6 months later, Clara cohabited the Riverside residence. This was not a marital reconciliation. It was a structured partnership designed to rebuild the relationship through counseling, deliberate communication, and conscious effort. Two individuals co-parenting, learning to function as a collaborative unit. Clara's presence altered the environment's affective quality. She introduced warmth and vitality through domestic artifacts and improved nutrition, transforming the space from a sterile lodging into a home. Emma occupied a dedicated room, a secure environment filled with tools for cognitive and emotional development. The couple attended weekly therapy, processing the relational damage and building new communication protocols, a slow reconstruction of trust. Certain sessions induced significant catharsis, often resulting in tears, yet their attendance remained consistent, a repeated choice for relational repair over dissolution. On Emma's first birthday, a small gathering was held. Evan attended, as did Dr. Chen, who observed her patient's progress with approval. Marcus arrived, commenting on the subject's concurrent fall from power and rise in personal well-being. Look at you, Marcus noted, as Damien assisted the infant with a cake. A year prior, you commanded an empire. Now you are covered in sucrose and exhibiting uncontrolled positive affect. The optimal decision of my life, Damien responded, cleaning the infant's face as she vocalized pleasure. Divesting from the business, experiencing total loss first, then choosing a different method of reconstruction. Later that evening, post-departure of guests, and with the child asleep, Damien and Clara sat observing the sunset. The atmosphere was conducive to intimate disclosure. I have been analyzing, Clara began. What is the subject? Us. The structure we are building. She turned toward him. I believe I have reached a state of readiness. Readiness for what? To re-engage with the original contract. Not merely co-parenting or partnership, but marriage in its fully integrated form. Damien exhibited a sharp intake of breath. Are you certain of this assessment? I am. Your behavioral consistency has been demonstrated daily for a year. You have engaged in the therapeutic work. You have proven that psychological change is possible. You have repeatedly prioritized our unit above all else. She smiled slightly. I believe the man I initially formed an attachment to has returned. Or perhaps this is a new iteration. Regardless, I am prepared to build a life with him. Damien initiated physical contact, and Clara accepted the embrace. They remained in this state, observing the light fade, both recognizing this relational stability as the true achievement, supplanting his former metrics of success. Two traumatized individuals engaged in a process of mutual healing, a family unit constructed in authentic presence rather than social performance. "My affection for you is profound," Damien stated, "not the proprietary attachment of before, but a deeper, more authentic bond congruent with the person I am striving to become." "I reciprocate that affection," Clara whispered, "and I grant you absolution. Finally and completely, I absolve you." Her words precipitated a significant release of psychic tension in Damien, a burden he had carried for over a year. He had performed the work and demonstrated that transformation was viable. Clara had observed and chosen to grant him the unmerited grace he required. They renewed their marital contract 6 months later in their backyard, with Emma ambulating between them. The setting was minimalistic, eschewing grandiosity for intimacy and a commitment to daily, conscious partnership. "I promise to maintain awareness of you," Damien stated, holding Clara's hands. "To choose you, to build a life with you, not adjacent to you, to remain present during adversity." "I promise to restore my trust in you," Clara said, tears indicating strong emotional release, "to offer grace during lapses, to build this life as equals, and to choose attachment over fear each day." Evan officiated, his skepticism mitigated by the observable evidence of change. Marcus served as a witness, remarking on the totality of Damien's life-altering transformation. Emma, 18 months old and unaware of the event's significance, vocalized her first distinct word at that moment. "Da! Da!" Damien lifted her, holding his child while kissing his wife, and experienced a feeling of deep psychological homeostasis. It was not power or status, but a quiet knowledge that from the wreckage of his former life, he had recovered what was essential. In subsequent years, Damien would analyze the night of the photograph as the single most destructive and constructive act he ever committed. Destructive in the pain it inflicted and the trust it demolished. Constructive because it forced a confrontation with his pathological self, compelling a radical change. He rechanneled his business acumen into a foundation for impoverished families. Clara completed her degree, establishing a practice to help women recover from relational betrayal. Emma developed with the secure attachment that comes from consistent paternal presence, learning that reliability, not control, constitutes strength. Damien would sometimes reflect on the abandoned empire and the persona he had to eliminate to become worthy of love. He would consider the self-portrait that catalyzed his collapse and feel a sense of gratitude. That singular act of hubris provided the critical lesson of his life. Possessing the world can leave you with nothing. Invulnerability can equal complete isolation. True power is not external control, but the internal capacity to choose connection when ego demands flight. It is the work of self-correction after error. It is the willingness to lose everything to find what truly matters. Damien Vale was a monarch ruling an empire of fear. Daniel Vale was a father and husband who learned the only conquest of value is over one's own destructive impulses. And as he entered sleep beside the partner he had almost lost and the life he had nearly ruined, he knew with full cognitive certainty which identity he preferred. The choice had cost him his entire world and given him everything of worth.
Lesson: one arrogant moment can destroy what 1,000 enemies never could. Damien Vale was the kind of man who looked unbeatable from a distance. He had the penthouse, the money, the empire, the reputation, the whole final boss of the city package. Men feared him, rivals respected him. The skyline practically bowed when his elevator doors opened. And yet, for all that big dog energy, the move that actually ruined him was not a bullet, not a raid, not some betrayal from a rival family. No, it was worse. It was dumber. It was a selfie. And that was the first life lesson right there. Destruction rarely enters wearing combat boots. Sometimes it enters smiling for a camera. Clara was home on the 47th floor, 7 months pregnant, folding baby clothes so tiny they looked like hope stitched in fabric. She was building a home with ritual and patience while Damien was out building an image with noise and ego. She set 2 plates. He sent 6 dry words. She waited. He wandered. She was making space for a child. He was making excuses for himself. That contrast was the real setup because long before the photo was sent, the marriage had already been starving. Then came Sienna, the walking red flag in designer heels. She did not seduce Damien with love, she seduced him with challenge. That was the trick. She understood his weak point better than any enemy ever had. He did not need affection, he needed to feel untouchable. So she pushed, teased, provoked, and finally dared him to prove he was fearless. And the man who could run an empire could not survive one sentence that implied he was scared. So he did the stupidest thing possible. He sent the picture to his pregnant wife. That was not confidence. That was cowardice wearing expensive cologne. A lot of people think Ruin arrives with a dramatic soundtrack, but his Ruin arrived with a delivered notification and a woman quietly taking off her wedding ring. No screaming, no glass breaking, no cinematic slap. Clara gave him something much worse than chaos. She gave him clarity. She left a letter, took her dignity, protected her child, and walked out of the monument he mistook for a marriage. And that was the revenge twist nobody in his empire could have predicted. She did not try to destroy him. She simply refused to stay where he had already abandoned her. That is lesson number 2. The coldest revenge is often emotional self-respect. Damien had spent years believing power meant control. He thought money, status, and fear could substitute for presence. He thought providing luxury was the same as providing love. But the moment Clara left, all that polished success turned into a giant echo chamber. The penthouse became a museum for a dead version of his life. Every expensive object turned into evidence. The view mocked him. The nursery accused him. The silence convicted him. And then the plot twisted again. The king of the city did not win Clara back with threats, gifts, or lawyer games. That old version of Damien would have tried to solve her pain the way he solved business problems, dominate, outspend, outmaneuver. But for the first time in his life, he ran into a consequence he could not intimidate. He had to sit with it. He had to shrink. He had to become human again. He sold the penthouse. He moved to Riverside. He went to therapy. He signed the custody terms instead of weaponizing power. He learned how to cook badly, learned how to lose, learned how to wait, learned how to show up without demanding applause. And this is where the story really earns its lesson. Redemption did not begin when he cried. Redemption began when he became boring. That sounds harsh, but it is real. Anybody can break down after consequences hit. Anybody can send long emotional messages when the empire cracks. But changing diapers at 7 in the morning, making coffee, staying through the crying, respecting boundaries, and returning the next day to do it all again. That is not performance, that is proof. The city had feared Damien Vale, but his daughter Emma did not need a feared man. She needed a present one. Clara did not need a king crawling back with speeches. She needed a co-parent who could be trusted in ordinary time, and ordinary time is where character finally tells the truth. That was the final plot twist. The man spent years trying to become larger than life, only to discover that the life he actually wanted was small enough to fit inside a kitchen, a nursery, and a backyard birthday party. So the life lesson hit like a truck. Pride makes people do permanent damage for temporary validation. One reckless act, one ego-driven message, one moment of wanting to feel powerful can burn down the only thing in a person's life that was actually real. And rebuilding does not happen through dominance. It happens through humility, consistency, and repeated choices made when nobody is clapping. Damien's enemies never defeated him. His ego did. And Clara's greatest victory was not that she left. It was that when he finally came back changed, she made him earn even the possibility of being let in. That is why the story hits, not because the selfie was scandalous, but because it proves something brutally true. Some people lose kingdoms because of greed, some because of war, and some because they confuse being feared with being loved. Damien sent one photo to prove he was untouchable. What it really proved was that he had no idea what was worth holding.